The security guard's radio crackled as Kevin Thompson, the store manager, crossed his arms and blocked my path to the exit. His voice carried that particular tone of authority mixed with suspicion that I'd heard too many times before. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside and empty that bag. We have reason to believe you've taken items without paying. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." I stood there in the fluorescent-lit entrance of Fresh Mart, holding my reusable shopping bag, wearing my faded jeans and a simple gray hoodie. To Kevin, I probably looked like just another customer he could intimidate. My sneakers squeaked against the polished floor as I shifted my weight, and I could feel the stares of other shoppers beginning to gather around us. The automatic doors whooshed open and closed behind me, letting in the warm California afternoon air, but the atmosphere inside had turned ice cold. "I have my receipt," I said calmly, reaching into my jacket pocket. But Kevin held up his hand, stopping me mid-motion. "Don't move," he commanded, his chest puffing out with self-importance. "Tyler, call security. We need to handle this properly." The young cashier, Tyler Johnson, looked uncomfortable as he picked up the phone. I could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the way he glanced between Kevin and me, as if something didn't feel right about this situation. But Kevin was his boss, and in retail, the hierarchy was everything. That's when I heard it. Kevin's phone buzzing insistently in his shirt pocket. Once, twice, 3 times, he ignored it, too focused on his moment of perceived power. But then it rang again, and the caller ID made him frown. He glanced at the screen, and I saw his expression shift from confidence to confusion. "Fresh Mart Corporate HN" flashed across his phone. Kevin hesitated, looking between me and his phone. "Take a message," he told Tyler. "I'm dealing with a situation here." But the phone kept ringing. Amanda Chen, regional director, wasn't the type to be ignored. I knew that better than anyone, though Kevin had no idea why. "You should probably answer that," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the growing crowd of onlookers. "Amanda doesn't like to be kept waiting." Kevin's frown deepened. How did this supposed shoplifter know the regional director's name? How did she know Amanda's habits? His thumb hovered over the answer button, uncertainty creeping into his voice for the first time. "How do you know who's calling?" I smiled then, not smug or victorious, just patient. "Because she's probably calling about the new regional ownership structure that just went into effect this morning. The one where I became partial owner of 15 Fresh Mart locations." I paused, letting that sink in. "Including this one?" The color drained from Kevin's face. Tyler's mouth fell open. The gathered customers started whispering among themselves, phones coming out to record what was clearly becoming a much more interesting situation than anyone had expected. Kevin's phone continued its insistent buzzing. "That's impossible," he stammered. "You're just some random customer. You can't be." "Maya Rodriguez," I said, extending my hand in a gesture that was both professional and pointed. "And you're Kevin Thompson, store manager. We've never met in person, but I've reviewed your performance reports. Generally positive, though there have been some concerns about customer relations." Kevin stared at my outstretched hand as if it might bite him. The phone kept ringing. The crowd kept growing. And I kept smiling that same calm, patient smile that had gotten me through 4 years of being underestimated, overlooked, and written off by people who thought they knew better. Now let me take you back to where this all began. Because the woman standing in that Fresh Mart entrance wasn't always someone who could make store managers go pale with a simple introduction. 4 years ago, I was Maya Rodriguez, the family disappointment, the college dropout who threw away a guaranteed future for what everyone called a foolish dream. My story starts in San Diego, in a house where success was measured in degrees and professional achievements, where dinner conversations revolved around quarterly reports and partnership tracks. The Rodriguez family had built their reputation on stability, predictability, and traditional paths to success. My father, David Rodriguez, ran Rodriguez and Associates, a CPA firm that had been serving San Diego businesses for over 20 years. My mother, Patricia, managed the administrative side with military precision. Together, they had created a legacy they expected their children to inherit and expand. My older sister Jessica had followed the script perfectly. Stanford Law, third in her class, now a corporate attorney pulling down six figures at a prestigious downtown firm. She lived in a high-rise condo with panoramic views of the bay, drove a BMW, and attended charity galas where her picture appeared in the society pages. When Jessica walked into a room, people knew she belonged there. My younger brother Carlos was well on his way to matching her success. Pre-med at UCSD, perfect grades, volunteer work at free clinics, already accepted to 3 medical schools. Carlos had that quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly where his life was headed and having the talent to get there. And then there was me, Maya, the middle child, the one who was supposed to bridge the gap between Jessica's legal brilliance and Carlos's medical calling by taking over the family accounting firm. I was business major at San Diego State, pulling decent grades but lacking the passion that seemed to drive my siblings. While Jessica devoured case law and Carlos memorized anatomy textbooks, I found myself drawn to something entirely different. I was fascinated by small businesses. Not the established corporations my father served, but the tiny operations that struggled to keep their doors open. The corner markets run by immigrant families, the food trucks that moved from block to block, the independent shops that competed against massive chains with nothing but determination and heart. I spent my free time visiting these places, talking to the owners, learning about their challenges and dreams. During my junior year, I started helping a Vietnamese family who ran a tiny grocery store near campus. The Nguyen family had immigrated 5 years earlier, and while their English was improving, navigating American business regulations was overwhelming. I began stopping by after classes, helping them understand invoices, organize their inventory, and develop simple marketing strategies. I wasn't getting paid, and it wasn't part of any class assignment. I just loved watching their small operation become more efficient and profitable. That's when I realized something that terrified my family. I didn't want to manage other people's money from behind a desk. I wanted to build something myself. I wanted to understand every aspect of running a business, from stocking shelves to negotiating with suppliers, to creating customer loyalty. I wanted to prove that with the right approach, small independent stores could not only survive but thrive. The explosion came during Sunday dinner at our house in La Jolla. Jessica was visiting from her downtown apartment, regaling us with stories about her latest corporate merger. Carlos was describing his research on pediatric cardiology. The conversation flowed with the easy rhythm of shared ambition and understood expectations. Maya's been helping that little store near campus, my mother mentioned, almost as an afterthought. Such a nice way to practice your business skills before you graduate. I took a deep breath. I'd been rehearsing this moment for weeks, but sitting there surrounded by my family's conventional success, the words felt heavier than I'd anticipated. Actually, I've been thinking about changing my major, maybe focusing on entrepreneurship and small business development. The table went quiet. My father set down his fork and looked at me with the expression he reserved for clients who brought him incomplete tax. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Documents. What exactly does that mean, Maya? I want to learn how to start and run my own business, maybe open a small store, understand the retail industry from the ground up. There's so much potential in independent operations if they're managed correctly. Jessica laughed, the sound sharp in the dining room. You want to work retail? Maya, that's not a career, that's a job for people who don't have other options. There's nothing wrong with honest work, Carlos said diplomatically, but I could hear the concern in his voice. But you're smart enough for so much more than that. My father leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. Maya, I've spent 20 years building this firm. I've created opportunities for you that most people would kill for. You could graduate, get your CPA certification, and step into a position that guarantees financial security for life. Why would you throw that away for something so uncertain? Because I don't want financial security handed to me, I replied, my voice stronger than I felt. I want to earn it myself. I want to build something from nothing and prove it can work. My mother set down her water glass with more force than necessary. Build what, exactly? A corner store? Maya, be realistic. You're talking about throwing away your education for minimum wage work. I'm talking about learning an industry from every angle, I shot back. Understanding customers, suppliers, inventory management, marketing, everything. Most business majors graduate and go work for companies they don't really understand. They push papers and analyze reports, but they've never actually built anything. Because building a business empire requires capital, connections, and experience, Jessica interjected. Things you get by working your way up through established companies, not by stocking shelves in some mom-and-pop shop. The argument escalated from there. My father questioned my judgment. My mother worried about what their friends would think. And my siblings took turns explaining why my plan was naive and short-sighted. By the time dessert was served, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. I've made up my mind, I said finally. I'm switching my major to focus on entrepreneurship. After graduation, I'm going to start my own business. My father's face had turned red, a sign that his patience was exhausted. If you're determined to waste your potential, don't expect this family to subsidize your failure. We won't be providing financial support for this foolishness. I wouldn't ask for it, I replied. This is something I need to do on my own. The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica shook her head in disgust. Carlos looked sympathetic but disappointed. My parents exchanged the kind of look that said they'd tried their best but clearly failed somewhere along the way. That was the beginning of the end of my relationship with my family. Over the following months, as I switched majors and began developing concrete plans for my future business, the invitations to family gatherings became less frequent. Phone calls grew shorter and more strained. When I graduated with a degree in entrepreneurship and small business management, my parents attended the ceremony but left immediately afterward, skipping the celebration dinner I'd hoped we could share. The final break came when I announced I was moving to Phoenix to start fresh. I'd found a tiny corner store for lease in a working-class neighborhood, and I'd saved enough money from part-time jobs to cover the first year's rent and initial inventory. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. You're making the biggest mistake of your life, my father told me during our last phone conversation. When this fails, and it will fail, don't come crawling back expecting us to fix everything. I won't, I promised. And I meant it. The day I loaded my beat-up Honda Civic with everything I owned and drove toward Phoenix, I felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration. I was 22 years old, completely on my own, with no safety net and no support system. But I was also free to succeed or fail on my own terms. Phoenix in August was brutal. The heat hit me like a physical force when I stepped out of my air-conditioned car, and I realized I'd chosen one of the most challenging environments possible for starting over. The corner store I'd leased was in a neighborhood called Maryvale, where small businesses struggled and chain stores dominated the landscape. The previous owner had failed after 18 months, and the landlord made it clear he didn't expect me to last much longer. The store itself was a disaster. Outdated refrigeration units, flickering fluorescent lights, narrow aisles crammed with dusty merchandise that hadn't sold in months. The cash register was ancient. The floor tiles were cracked, and the security system consisted of a single camera that may or may not have been functional. I stood in the middle of that mess, surrounded by the evidence of someone else's failed dreams, and wondered if my family had been right all along. But then I remembered why I was there. This wasn't about proving them wrong or showing off. This was about building something meaningful, creating value for a community that needed it, and learning every aspect of running a business from the most basic level possible. I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. The first month was pure survival. I cleaned every surface, organized the inventory, and discovered that most of the products were either expired or marked up so high that customers went elsewhere. I spent my days learning the neighborhood, talking to residents about what they actually needed, and my nights researching suppliers who could provide quality products at reasonable prices. The customers who did come in were skeptical of the young woman who'd taken over their familiar corner store. Many spoke primarily Spanish, and my high school-level vocabulary wasn't nearly adequate for building relationships. I bought language learning software and practiced during slow periods, gradually improving my ability to communicate with the community I was trying to serve. Money was incredibly tight. I was living in a studio apartment with no furniture beyond a mattress on the floor and a card table. My meals consisted mainly of the products I couldn't sell from the store, and I walked to work every day to save gas money. There were nights when I lay awake calculating and recalculating my expenses, wondering if I'd have enough to make rent. But slowly, incrementally, things began to improve. I replaced the expired products with fresh inventory, focusing on items the community actually wanted rather than what the previous owner thought they should want. I learned that my customers valued fresh produce, quality meat, and household essentials at fair prices more than the random assortment of dusty goods that had been sitting on the shelves. I established relationships with local suppliers, many of them family-owned operations like mine. By buying directly from regional distributors, rather than through expensive chain store networks, I could offer competitive prices while maintaining decent profit margins. I learned to read customer patterns, stocking up on items that sold quickly, and avoiding products that would sit untouched. Most importantly, I learned that retail wasn't just about selling products. It was about becoming part of a community, understanding the needs and preferences of specific customers, and building relationships that went beyond simple transactions. Mrs. Gonzalez came in every Tuesday for her weekly shopping, always buying the same items in the same quantities. I started setting aside the best produce for her visit, and learned that her grandchildren loved the small candies by the register. Mr. Johnson worked nights and needed a place to buy essentials during unusual hours, so I extended my closing time by 30 minutes. These small gestures didn't cost much, but they created loyalty that chain stores couldn't match. Customers began recommending my store to their friends and family. Word spread that the corner market had new management that actually cared about serving the neighborhood well. By the end of my first year, I was turning a small but consistent profit. The store was clean, well-stocked, and busy enough that I needed to hire part-time help. I was working 12-hour days 7 days a week, but I was building something real. That's when I started thinking bigger. I'd proven that a small independent store could succeed with the right approach. But I wondered what would happen if I could apply those same principles on a larger scale. What if I could open a second location? What if I could create a small chain of community-focused stores that combine the personal service of independent operations with the efficiency and purchasing power of larger businesses? The idea excited me, but it also terrified me. Expanding would require capital I didn't have, business skills I was still developing, and a level of risk that could wipe out everything I'd built. But I'd learned something important during that first year in Phoenix. I was capable of more than I'd ever imagined, and I was willing to work harder than I'd thought possible to achieve something meaningful. I began developing a business plan for expansion, researching potential locations, and networking with other small business owners who might be interested in partnership opportunities. I attended every entrepreneurship workshop and small business seminar I could find, soaking up knowledge about scaling operations, managing multiple locations, and building brand recognition. During my second year, I opened a second store in a different Phoenix neighborhood. This one was larger, with better equipment and a more diverse product selection. I applied everything I'd learned from my first location, while adapting to the specific needs of a new community. Within 6 months, both stores were profitable and growing. That success caught the attention of Marcus Williams, a business consultant who specialized in helping small retail operations expand strategically. Marcus had been watching my progress through mutual contacts in the Phoenix small business community, and he approached me with a proposition that would change everything. "You've proven you can make independent stores work," he told me over coffee at a downtown Phoenix cafe. "But you're thinking too small. There are opportunities in this market for someone who understands both community-focused service and efficient operations. Have you ever considered franchising?" I'd heard of franchising, of course, but I'd always associated it with massive corporate chains like McDonald's or Subway. Marcus explained that there were smaller franchise opportunities, regional chains that maintained the personal touch of independent operations while providing the support and resources that made expansion possible. "There's a company called Freshmart," he continued. "They're a West Coast grocery chain that's looking for franchise partners in Arizona. They provide the branding, supplier relationships, and operational support, but they want partners who understand local markets and can maintain the community connections that big chains often lose." The idea intrigued me, but I was cautious. I'd worked so hard to build something independent, something that reflected my own values and vision. Would joining a franchise system compromise what I'd created? Marcus arranged a meeting with Amanda Chen, Fresh Mart's regional director for Southwest expansion. Amanda flew to Phoenix to visit my stores personally, spending time observing my operations, talking to my customers, and understanding my approach to community-focused retail. "You've built exactly what we're looking for," she told me after her visit. "Independent thinking, community connections, and operational efficiency. We're not looking for people who want to follow a rigid corporate playbook. We want partners who can adapt our resources to serve their specific markets effectively." The Fresh Mart partnership offered everything I needed to expand: access to better suppliers, professional marketing support, standardized operational systems, and most importantly, the capital to open multiple locations simultaneously. In exchange, I would operate under their branding and follow their basic operational guidelines while maintaining significant autonomy in day-to-day management. It took me 3 months to make the decision. I visited existing Fresh Mart locations, talked to other franchise partners, and thoroughly reviewed the contract terms. Finally, I realized that this partnership could help me achieve my original goal of proving that community-focused retail could compete with major chains, just on a much larger scale than I'd initially imagined. I signed the franchise agreement and used the capital to open 3 new locations simultaneously, converting my existing stores to the Fresh Mart brand while opening additional markets I'd been researching. Within 18 months, I was operating 6 profitable locations across Phoenix and building a reputation as one of Fresh Mart's most successful franchise partners. The success was intoxicating, but it was also isolating. I was working constantly, traveling between locations, managing staff, and dealing with the complex logistics of running multiple operations. I had no social life, no time for hobbies, and no contact with my family back in San Diego. The loneliness was sometimes overwhelming, but I was driven by the knowledge that I was building something significant. During my 3rd year with Fresh Mart, Amanda Chen approached me with an opportunity that seemed impossible. The company was restructuring their ownership model, creating regional partnerships that would give successful franchise operators equity stakes in larger territories. Instead of just running individual stores, partners could become regional owners with responsibility for entire market areas. "You've proven you can make this work," Amanda explained. "We want to offer you the Southwest Regional Partnership. 15 stores across Arizona and Southern California, with the opportunity to expand further if the markets support it." The numbers were staggering. Instead of owning individual franchise locations, I would become a partial owner of the entire regional operation, with profit-sharing arrangements that could make me wealthy beyond anything I'd imagined when I started with that tiny corner store in Maryvale. But there was a catch. The regional partnership required me to relocate to Southern California to oversee the expanded territory. Specifically, I would need to base my operations in the Riverside area, just an hour's drive from San Diego and my family. I hadn't spoken to my parents in over 3 years. Jessica and Carlos occasionally sent brief text messages on birthdays or holidays, but we had no real relationship. The thought of returning to Southern California brought up complicated emotions I'd been avoiding. Would my success finally prove to them that I'd made the right choice? Did I even care about their approval anymore? Was I strong enough to be successful in the same region where I'd once been dismissed as a failure? I spent weeks wrestling with the decision. The business opportunity was incredible, but the personal implications were terrifying. Finally, I realized that avoiding my past wasn't the same as moving beyond it. If I was truly confident in what I'd built, then I should be able to succeed anywhere, including the place where people had doubted me most. I accepted the regional partnership and moved to Riverside 6 months ago. The transition was complex, involving coordination with existing store managers, integration of operational systems, and development of expansion plans for underserved markets. I was busier than ever, but I was also building something that felt significant and lasting. My 15 stores were profitable and growing. Customer satisfaction scores were consistently high, and several locations had won regional awards for community service and operational excellence. I was invited to speak at business conferences, featured in trade publications, and recognized as one of Fresh Mart's most successful regional partners. But I maintained a low profile in terms of publicity. My picture didn't appear in company marketing materials, and I rarely did interviews with business media. This was partly because I was focused on operations, rather than promotion, but it was also because I wasn't ready to announce my return to Southern California. I knew that eventually I would run into people from my past, but I wanted that to happen naturally, rather than through some orchestrated reveal. Which brings us back to yesterday morning, when I decided to make an unannounced visit to the Fresh Mart location in Riverside. I often dropped by stores without warning to observe operations and customer interactions. It helped me stay connected to the day-to-day reality of retail work and identify potential improvements. I dressed casually, as I always did for these informal visits. Jeans, sneakers, and a simple hoodie that wouldn't make me stand out among regular customers. I wanted to observe the store from a customer's perspective, see how staff interacted with shoppers, and get a sense of the overall atmosphere. I'd never met Kevin Thompson in person, though I'd reviewed his performance reports and knew he was generally regarded as a competent manager. His store had good customer satisfaction scores and solid financial performance, though there had been a few complaints about his tendency to be overly suspicious of certain customers. I walked through the store, observing the product displays, checking the cleanliness of the produce section, and noting how staff members interacted with customers. Everything looked good, but I wanted to test the customer service experience by making a small purchase. I selected a few items, paid at the register, and headed toward the exit with my reusable shopping bag. That's when Kevin approached me, his expression suggesting he'd been watching me for several minutes. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice carrying an edge of suspicion. "I noticed you spending a lot of time in the store without buying much. Mind if I check your bag?" I was shocked, both by the accusation and by the realization that Kevin had somehow decided I looked like a shoplifter. I wondered what had triggered his suspicion. Was it my casual clothing? My age? The fact that I'd been observing rather than rushing through my shopping? "I have my receipt," I said, reaching for my jacket pocket. But Kevin stepped closer, his posture becoming more aggressive. "Don't reach for anything," he commanded. "I need you to step aside so we can handle this properly." That's when I realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding. Kevin was treating me like a criminal, making assumptions based on his perception of who belonged in his store and who didn't. The irony was almost overwhelming. Here I was, being accused of stealing from my own business by someone who worked for me, because he couldn't imagine that someone dressed like me could be anything other than a potential threat. I could have identified myself immediately, but something made me pause. I wanted to see how far this would go, how Kevin would handle what he thought was a routine security issue. I was curious about the judgment and assumptions that had led to this moment, and I realized this was an opportunity to understand something important about my business and my role in it. So I stood there calmly, watching Kevin's confidence grow as he prepared to demonstrate his authority over someone he assumed had no power to challenge him. I waited as he called for backup, ignored his ringing phone, and made it clear that he saw me as nothing more than a problem to be solved. And that's when Amanda Chen's call changed everything. I watched Kevin's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and mounting panic as Amanda's name continued flashing on his phone screen. The crowd around us had grown larger, with customers pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming an unusual situation. Tyler stood frozen behind the customer service counter, his hand still hovering over the security button he'd been instructed to press. "Answer it," I said quietly, nodding toward Kevin's still buzzing phone. "She's probably wondering why the regional ownership transition paperwork hasn't been acknowledged yet." Kevin's hands trembled slightly as he finally accepted the call. "This is Kevin Thompson, store manager at Riverside location," he said, his voice pitched higher than normal. I could hear Amanda's crisp, professional tone through the speaker, though I couldn't make out her exact words. "Yes, ma'am, everything is fine here," Kevin lied, glancing nervously at me. "Just handling some routine customer service issues." Amanda's response was apparently longer this time, because Kevin's expression grew increasingly uncomfortable as he listened. His eyes darted between me and the gathered crowd, and I could see him beginning to piece together the impossibility of the situation he'd created. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Kevin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You said the new regional owner is conducting store visits today?" I smiled and held out my hand again. "Maya Rodriguez," I repeated. And you're having quite the interesting first conversation with your new boss." The phone slipped from Kevin's fingers, clattering against the polished floor. Tyler rushed forward to retrieve it, but the damage was done. The entire store had heard Amanda's voice confirming what I'd been trying to tell them. Several customers were now openly recording, and I could see social media notifications lighting up phones throughout the crowd. "This can't be happening," Kevin muttered, running his hands through his hair. "You're just a kid. You can't possibly own anything. This has to be some kind of mistake." I bent down and picked up his phone, noting that Amanda was still on the line. "Amanda, this is Maya. Sorry for the confusion, but I think we need to have a conversation about proper customer service protocols at the Riverside location." Amanda's laugh was warm and slightly amused. "I take it your unannounced visit didn't go as smoothly as planned?" "You could say that," I replied, looking directly at Kevin. "I'm standing here with a store manager who just accused me of shoplifting and refused to look at my receipt. We might need to schedule some additional training sessions." The silence that followed was deafening. Kevin's face had gone completely white, and I could see him mentally calculating how badly he'd just destroyed his career. Tyler looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor, and the gathered customers were whispering excitedly among themselves. "Kevin," I said, handing him back his phone, "why don't you take this call in your office? Amanda and I need to discuss some operational changes, and I think you'll want privacy for that conversation." He nodded mutely and stumbled toward the back of the store, Amanda's voice already beginning what I suspected would be a very uncomfortable discussion about assumption-making and customer relations. I turned to address the crowd that had gathered. "I apologize for the disruption to your shopping experience," I said, speaking clearly enough that everyone could hear. "We're always working to improve our customer service, and today has been a valuable learning opportunity for our management team." Most of the customers began to disperse, though several approached me with questions about the store, compliments about their shopping experience, and surprisingly, job applications from people who'd been impressed by how I'd handled the situation. Tyler remained at his post, looking shell-shocked but professional. "Tyler," I called him over, "you handled that situation well. When your manager tells you to do something, you're supposed to follow instructions, even when they seem questionable. That shows good employment discipline." He looked relieved. "Thank you, ma'am. I wasn't sure what was happening, but something felt off about the whole thing." "Trust your instincts," I advised. "Good customer service comes from treating people with respect and giving them the benefit of the doubt. We'll be implementing some new training programs to help everyone feel more confident in these situations." I spent the next hour walking through the store, talking with employees, observing operations, and making mental notes about areas for improvement. The produce section needed better organization, the checkout lines could be more efficient, and several departments needed updated pricing displays. But overall, the store was well-maintained and profitable, which meant Kevin's management skills were solid, even if his people skills needed work. When Kevin finally emerged from his office, he looked like a man who'd just received a comprehensive education in humility. His face was red, his hair disheveled, and his confidence had been completely deflated. He approached me with the careful posture of someone walking on very thin ice. "Ms. Rodriguez," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I owe you an enormous apology. I made assumptions that were completely inappropriate and unprofessional. I violated company policy and treated you with disrespect that has no excuse." I studied his face, looking for sincerity beneath the obvious fear. "Kevin, what made you think I was shoplifting?" He swallowed hard, clearly uncomfortable with the question. "You were young, dressed casually, and you spent time looking around without buying much initially. I thought you might be casing the store or concealing merchandise. So you profiled me based on my age and clothing?" "Yes," he admitted, his voice heavy with shame. "It was wrong, and I know better. We're trained specifically not to make those kinds of judgments, but I let my biases override my training." I appreciated his honesty, even though it confirmed what I'd suspected. "Kevin, you've been with Fresh Mart for 3 years, and your performance reviews are generally positive. Your store runs efficiently, and your financial numbers are solid. But customer service is about more than just processing transactions correctly." He nodded, hanging on every word like his career depended on it, which it probably did. "I'm not going to fire you," I continued, and I saw his shoulders sag with relief. "But we're going to implement some changes. You'll be attending additional training on unconscious bias and customer relations. You'll also be working with Amanda to develop better protocols for handling suspected security issues. Yes, ma'am, whatever you think is necessary. And Kevin? I paused until he met my eyes. Next time someone tells you they have a receipt, look at the receipt first. It's really that simple. He managed a weak smile. Understood completely. I left the store that afternoon with mixed feelings. The incident had been uncomfortable and embarrassing, but it had also revealed important information about my business operations and company culture. More importantly, it had reminded me of something I'd learned during my early days in Phoenix. How you treat people when you think they have no power over you reveals who you really are. The drive back to my apartment gave me time to process what had happened and what it meant. I'd been back in Southern California for 6 months, building a successful business operation, but I'd been doing it in relative anonymity. Today's incident would change that. Videos of the confrontation were already circulating on social media, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the story spread beyond the immediate retail community. My phone buzzed with text messages and missed calls as I drove. Amanda had sent updates about her conversation with Kevin and preliminary thoughts about implementing company-wide training improvements. Several other store managers had reached out with questions about new policies. My business partner Marcus had forwarded 3 interview requests from local business publications. But mixed in with the professional messages were notifications I hadn't expected. Jessica had sent a brief text. Saw a video online. Is that really you? Carlos had left a voicemail. Maya, I don't understand what's happening, but we need to talk. Even my mother had called, though she hadn't left a message. I realized that my careful anonymity was about to end. My family, who had written me off as a failure 4 years ago, was about to discover that not only had I succeeded, but I'd succeeded spectacularly. The question was whether I was ready for that conversation, and what it would mean for the relationships I'd been avoiding. That evening, I sat in my apartment overlooking the riverside cityscape, thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 4 years ago, I'd left San Diego in my beat-up Honda Civic with nothing but determination and a belief that I could build something meaningful. Tonight, I was a regional business owner with 15 profitable locations and a growing reputation in the retail industry. But success felt different than I'd imagined it would. I'd thought that achieving my goals would feel triumphant, that proving my family wrong would be satisfying in some clear, definitive way. Instead, I felt oddly empty. I'd built something impressive, but I'd built it alone, without anyone to share the victories or support me through the struggles. My phone rang, interrupting my contemplation. The caller ID showed Jessica's name, and after a moment's hesitation, I answered. Maya? Her voice sounded uncertain, almost tentative. I saw some videos online today. People are saying you own a grocery store chain? I own part of a regional grocery operation, I corrected. 15 stores across Arizona and Southern California. The silence stretched between us, filled with 4 years of missed conversations and unresolved hurt. Finally, Jessica spoke again. I don't understand. When did this happen? How did this happen? It's been happening gradually over the past 4 years, I replied. I started with one small store in Phoenix and built from there. But you never told us. We thought you were struggling, maybe even failing. You assumed I was failing, I corrected gently. I never told you anything because you stopped asking. Another pause. Maya, we need to talk. All of us. Mom and Dad, Carlos, everyone. Can we meet somewhere? Can we have dinner and talk through all of this? I considered her request carefully. Part of me wanted to agree immediately, to finally have the conversation we should have had years ago. But another part of me remembered the pain of being dismissed and cut off, the loneliness of building my business without any family support or encouragement. I'll think about it, I said finally. But Jessica, if we're going to have that conversation, it needs to be honest. No glossing over what happened, no pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. I understand, she said quickly. We owe you that much. After we hung up, I realized that tomorrow would bring new challenges beyond just managing my business operations. My family wanted to reconnect, but I wasn't sure I was ready to trust them with the vulnerability that real reconciliation would require. I spent the next several days focused on work, using the familiar routines of business management to avoid thinking too deeply about personal relationships. Amanda and I implemented new customer service training protocols across all 15 locations. I visited each store personally, talking with managers and staff about unconscious bias, appropriate security procedures, and the importance of treating every customer with respect regardless of their appearance or perceived economic status. The response from employees was overwhelmingly positive. Many shared their own experiences with being misjudged or profiled, and several offered suggestions for improving our customer service approach. I realized that the incident with Kevin had opened up important conversations about inclusion and respect that would benefit our entire operation. Media attention continued to grow around the story. Local business publications wanted interviews about my success as a young entrepreneur. Retail industry magazines were interested in my community-focused approach to franchise operations. Social media influencers were sharing the video of Kevin's confrontation with commentary about customer service and unconscious bias. But I declined most interview requests, preferring to let my business results speak for themselves. I'd learned during my time in Phoenix that sustainable success came from focusing on operations rather than publicity, and I wasn't interested in becoming a social media personality or business celebrity. However, I did agree to speak at a small business development workshop for aspiring entrepreneurs. The event was hosted by a community college in Riverside, and the audience consisted mainly of students and local residents interested in starting their own businesses. Standing at the podium, looking out at faces that reminded me of my younger self, I felt a responsibility to share not just the success story, but also the reality of what building a business actually required. 4 years ago, I was sitting where you are now, I began. I had big dreams, limited resources, and a family that thought I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I want to tell you about the journey from that point to this one, because it wasn't glamorous, and it definitely wasn't easy. I talked about the long hours, the financial uncertainty, and the social isolation that came with choosing an unconventional path. I shared stories about difficult customers, supplier problems, and the many nights I'd questioned whether I was strong enough to continue. But I also talked about the satisfaction of building something meaningful, the joy of serving a community effectively, and the pride that came from proving that independent thinking could lead to sustainable success. Success isn't just about financial achievements, I told them. It's about staying true to your values while adapting to changing circumstances. It's about treating people well even when they don't treat you well. And it's about being patient enough to build something lasting rather than looking for quick wins. During the question and answer session, a young woman in the front row raised her hand. How do you handle people who don't believe in your vision? Family members or friends who think you're wasting your time? The question hit closer to home than I'd expected. That's probably the hardest part, I admitted. You can't control other people's reactions to your choices, but you can control how much those reactions influence your decisions. Sometimes you have to be willing to disappoint people in the short term in order to become someone they can be proud of in the long term. But what if they never come around? She pressed. What if they never support you? I thought about my own family, about the years of silence, and the recent tentative outreach from Jessica. Then you have to decide whether their approval is worth compromising your authentic path. Sometimes the people who love us have their own fears and limitations that prevent them from supporting our dreams. That doesn't mean we should abandon our dreams, but it does mean we might need to find our support system elsewhere. After the workshop, several attendees approached me with more detailed questions about starting retail businesses, and I found myself exchanging contact information with people who reminded me of my younger self. Driving home, I realized how much I'd enjoyed sharing my experience and knowledge with aspiring entrepreneurs. It felt like a meaningful way to use my success to benefit others. That evening, Carlos called. Unlike Jessica's tentative approach, his voice was direct and concerned. Maya, we need to talk. Not just about the business stuff, but about everything that's happened between us. I know we messed up, and I want to understand how we can fix it. His honesty caught me off guard. Carlos had always been the most emotionally mature member of our family, but I hadn't expected him to take responsibility for the family's collective failure to support me. What do you want to know? I asked. Everything, he said. I want to understand what the last 4 years have been like for you. I want to know about your business, about your life, about what we missed by not being there. And I want to explain some things from our perspective, not to make excuses, but to help you understand why we reacted the way we did. I agreed to meet him for coffee the next day. The prospect made me nervous, but I appreciated his straightforward approach and his willingness to have a difficult conversation. We met at a small cafe in downtown Riverside, neutral territory that didn't carry emotional associations for either of us. Carlos arrived first, and I saw him before he noticed me. He'd grown into the confident young doctor our family had always expected him to become, but there was something different about his posture, a humility that hadn't been there 4 years ago. "Maya," he said, standing to embrace me. The hug was awkward at first, then genuine, and I realized how much I'd missed having family relationships despite the pain they'd caused. "You look good," he said as we sat down. "Successful, confident." "I feel different than I did 4 years ago," I admitted. "More sure of myself, I guess." "I can see that. And I need to start by apologizing for how we treated you when you decided to leave school and start your business. We were wrong, not just about your chances for success, but about how we handled our disagreement with your choices." I studied his face, looking for the sincerity I heard in his voice. "What changed your mind?" "Honestly, growing up. Starting medical school, dealing with real responsibility, making my own mistakes, and learning from them. I realized that the path that worked for me wouldn't necessarily work for everyone, and that dismissing someone's dreams just because they're different from your own is arrogant and short-sighted." He paused, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "But also, watching the videos of what happened at your store made me realize something about who you've become. The way you handled that situation, the calmness and professionalism you showed even when someone was treating you unfairly, that took real strength and maturity." "I've had a lot of practice dealing with people who underestimate me," I said with a slight smile. "Including your own family," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "Maya, we were so focused on our own definitions of success that we couldn't see the value in what you were trying to build. We thought we were protecting you from failure, but really we were just protecting ourselves from having to admit that our way wasn't the only way." His words carried weight because they acknowledged not just the fact that I'd succeeded, but the deeper issue of respect and support that had been missing from our family relationships. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied. "But Carlos, the hardest part wasn't proving that I could succeed. The hardest part was feeling like I had to succeed completely alone, without any encouragement or belief from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally." "You shouldn't have had to do that," he said firmly. "And I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've built, not just because it's financially successful, but because you stayed true to your values and found a way to serve your community while building something sustainable." We talked for 2 hours, covering everything from my early struggles in Phoenix to my current plans for expansion. Carlos shared stories about medical school, about the pressure he felt to live up to family expectations, and about his growing understanding that success could take many different forms. "Jessica wants to plan a family dinner," he said as we prepared to leave. "Mom and Dad are nervous about reaching out directly, but they want to see you and try to rebuild some kind of relationship." "What do you think?" I asked. "Do they actually want to understand what I've been doing, or do they just want to bask in reflected glory now that I'm successful?" Carlos considered the question carefully. "Honestly, probably a mixture of both. They're proud of your success, but they're also defensive about how they handled things before. Dad especially has a hard time admitting when he's wrong." "I'll think about it," I said. "But if we're going to have that dinner, everyone needs to understand that this isn't about them getting credit for my success or pretending that the last 4 years didn't happen." "I'll make that clear," Carlos promised. "Maya, whatever you decide about the family dinner, I want you to know that I'm here now. I want to be part of your life going forward, if you'll let me." The genuine emotion in his voice moved me more than I'd expected. "I'd like that too," I said. Driving home from our coffee meeting, I felt something shifting inside me. The anger and hurt I'd been carrying for 4 years hadn't disappeared, but it had been joined by something else, the possibility of genuine reconciliation. Not the kind that swept problems under the rug, but the kind that acknowledged past mistakes and built something better from honest communication. That weekend, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called my parents directly and invited them to visit one of my stores. Not for a family dinner or emotional reconciliation, but for a business meeting where they could see what I'd built and understand the scope of my operation. "I want you to meet me at the Fresh Mart in Riverside on Tuesday morning at 10, I told my father. "Dress professionally. This is a business visit, and I want you to see what I do for a living." The nervousness in his voice was obvious. "Of course, Maya, we'll be there." "And Dad?" I added. "Come prepared to ask intelligent questions about retail operations, supply chain management, and customer service protocols." This isn't a social visit. Tuesday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical Southern California winter weather. I arrived at the store early, spending time with Kevin reviewing operational improvements we'd implemented since the shoplifting incident. His customer service approach had improved dramatically, and I was pleased to see him interacting respectfully with every customer regardless of their appearance or purchase amount. My parents arrived precisely at 10, dressed in business attire that looked slightly out of place in a grocery store setting. My mother wore a conservative blue suit that would have been appropriate for a client meeting at their accounting firm. My father carried a briefcase and wore the expression he reserved for important business negotiations. "Good morning," I said, greeting them at the customer service desk. "Thank you for coming. I want to show you how my business operates." I spent the next hour giving them a comprehensive tour of the store, explaining everything from inventory management systems to employee scheduling protocols. I showed them our customer satisfaction tracking methods, our supplier relationship strategies, and our community outreach programs. I introduced them to key staff members and explained how our franchise model balanced corporate support with local autonomy. My parents listened attentively, asking increasingly sophisticated questions as they began to understand the complexity and scope of the operation. My father was particularly interested in the financial management systems, while my mother focused on customer service protocols and employee relations. "This is much more complex than I realized," my father admitted, as we concluded the tour in my office. "I thought retail was just buying products and selling them for a profit, but there are layers of strategy and management I never considered. Retail done well requires understanding psychology, logistics, economics, marketing, and human resources," I explained. "It's like running 15 small businesses simultaneously while coordinating with regional and national corporate structures." My mother was studying the awards and recognition certificates displayed on my office wall. "You've built something impressive, Maya. I can see why corporate headquarters values your partnership." "I've built something that serves communities while generating sustainable profits," I corrected. "The recognition is nice, but the real measure of success is whether we're meeting customer needs and supporting employee development." We talked for another 30 minutes about expansion plans, industry challenges, and my long-term vision for the business. My parents asked thoughtful questions and offered insights from their own experience running a professional service firm. For the first time in 4 years, we were having a conversation based on mutual respect and genuine interest. As they prepared to leave, my father paused at the office door. "Maya, I owe you an apology that goes beyond just not supporting your business choice. I failed to recognize your potential and your judgment, and I let my own narrow view of success blind me to what you were capable of achieving." The words carried more weight because they came after he'd seen concrete evidence of what I'd built. This wasn't just a grudging acknowledgement of my success. It was recognition that his original assessment had been fundamentally wrong. "I appreciate that, Dad," I said. "But what I really need going forward is trust in my judgment and respect for my choices, even when they don't align with what you would do." "You have that," he said firmly. "You've more than earned it." My mother hugged me goodbye, and for the first time in years, the gesture felt natural rather than obligatory. "We'd like to plan that family dinner Carlos mentioned," she said. "But on your terms, at your pace." "I'll let you know," I promised. "But I'm glad we had this conversation first." After they left, I sat in my office thinking about how much had changed in just a few weeks. The shoplifting incident had forced me to confront questions about my identity and relationships that I'd been avoiding. My family's tentative outreach had opened possibilities for reconciliation that I hadn't been sure I wanted. But most importantly, I realized that my success felt more meaningful when it was shared with people who understood and respected what I'd accomplished. Building the business had been important, but building authentic relationships based on mutual respect might be even more valuable. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Carlos told me about your meeting with Mom and Dad. They're impressed and proud, but more importantly, they finally understand what they missed. Are you ready for that family dinner yet?" I stared at the message for several minutes before responding. "Let's plan something for next weekend. But I want to cook. At my place. On my terms. Her response came immediately. Perfect. What can we bring? Just yourselves, I typed back. And honest conversation. For the first time in 4 years, I was looking forward to seeing my family again. The week leading up to the family dinner passed in a blur of operational meetings, supplier negotiations, and employee training sessions. I threw myself into work with an intensity that surprised even Amanda, who called me twice to suggest I might be overcompensating for the stress of reconnecting with my family. Maya, you visited 8 stores this week, she pointed out during our Thursday afternoon check-in call. That's more than double your usual schedule. Are you avoiding something? I was standing in the parking lot of our Anaheim location, watching the steady stream of customers entering and leaving the store. Business was good, operations were smooth, and my staff was performing excellently. But Amanda was right. I was using work as a distraction from the anxiety building inside me about Saturday's dinner. I want everything running perfectly, I replied, which was true but not the complete truth. This expansion phase is critical, and I can't afford any operational failures. Maya, Amanda's voice carried the gentle firmness of someone who'd become both a business partner and something approaching a mentor over the past 2 years. Your stores are running better than 90% of our franchise operations. You're not protecting your business by working yourself into exhaustion. You're avoiding something personal. I leaned against my car, watching a young mother struggle to manage 2 toddlers while pushing a shopping cart. One of my employees, a teenager named David, stepped outside to help her load groceries into her car, and I felt a familiar surge of pride in the culture we'd built across our locations. My family wants to have dinner at my apartment on Saturday, I admitted. It's the first time we'll all be in the same room in 4 years. Amanda was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear her thinking through the implications. She knew about my family situation, though I'd shared only the basic outline of our estrangement. How do you feel about that? She asked finally. Terrified, I said honestly, and angry that I'm terrified. I've built a successful business, proven my judgment was sound, and established myself as a competent professional. I shouldn't be worried about having dinner with people who share my DNA. But they're not just people who share your DNA, Amanda pointed out gently. They're the people whose approval you wanted most when you started this journey. That doesn't just disappear because you've succeeded professionally. Her words hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. Despite everything I'd accomplished, despite the confidence I'd gained and the independence I'd built, part of me was still the 22-year-old who'd driven away from San Diego feeling rejected and misunderstood. What if we have nothing to talk about? I asked. What if 4 years of separate lives have made us into strangers? What if they're only interested in my success because it reflects well on them? Then you'll know where you stand, Amanda replied. Maya, you've spent 4 years building something meaningful without their support. If they can't appreciate what you've accomplished for the right reasons, that's information about them, not about you. After we hung up, I drove to my apartment in Riverside, a modern 2-bedroom unit with views of the city and the mountains beyond. I'd chosen the location for its proximity to my primary stores and its distance from San Diego, but now I was grateful for the neutral space it provided. This dinner would happen on my territory, in a place that represented my independent life, rather than our shared history. Friday evening, I went grocery shopping for ingredients, an activity that felt surreal given my professional relationship with the retail food industry. I walked through a competitor's store, observing their layout and customer service approach, while selecting items for what would either be a reconciliation dinner or a final goodbye meal. I'd decided to cook Mexican food, partly because it was something I'd learned to make well during my time in Phoenix, and partly because it represented the kind of authentic, community-focused approach that had guided my business philosophy. The menu would be simple but carefully prepared: homemade tamales, fresh guacamole, cilantro lime rice, and tres leche cake for dessert. Cooking had become a form of meditation for me during the difficult early years in Phoenix. When I was stressed about money or struggling with loneliness, spending time in the kitchen helped center my thoughts and remind me that I could create something nourishing and beautiful, even when other aspects of my life felt chaotic. Saturday morning, I started the tamale preparation early, knowing the corn masa would need time to develop proper texture and the pork filling would require hours of slow cooking. As I worked, I found myself thinking about the last meal I'd shared with my family. That disastrous Sunday dinner 4 years ago, when I'd announced my intention to change my major and start my own business. The contrast was striking. Then, I'd been asking for understanding and support for a dream that existed only in my imagination. Now, I was hosting a dinner as a successful business owner with concrete achievements and a proven track record. The power dynamic had shifted completely, but I wasn't sure whether that would make the conversation easier or more complicated. My apartment filled with the rich scents of cumin, garlic, and slow-cooked meat as the morning progressed. I set the dining table with simple but elegant place settings, choosing my grandmother's plates that my mother had given me when I moved out of the dorm freshman year. Using family heirloom dishes felt like a small gesture toward acknowledging our shared history while asserting my independence. Carlos arrived first, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing a nervous smile. "It smells incredible in here," he said, embracing me at the door. "I forgot you knew how to cook like this." "I learned during my starving artist phase in Phoenix," I replied with a grin. "Turns out cooking for yourself is cheaper than eating out, and I had a lot of time to practice." He wandered around my apartment, taking in the modern furniture, the business awards displayed on floating shelves, and the framed photos from my various store openings. "This place is beautiful, Maya. It feels like you." "What does that mean?" I asked, genuinely curious about his perception. "Clean, successful, but also warm. Like you've built something solid, but haven't forgotten how to make it feel like home." Jessica arrived 10 minutes later, followed closely by our parents. The apartment suddenly felt smaller with all 5 of us gathered in the living room, and I was acutely aware of the nervous energy everyone was carrying. My mother handed me a bouquet of flowers, a formal gesture that felt slightly awkward but well-intentioned. "Thank you for inviting us, Maya. Your home is lovely." My father stood near the windows, looking out at the city view with his hands clasped behind his back. "You can see the mountains from here," he observed. "That's quite a view for someone your age." The comment carried an undertone of surprise that I could afford such a place, and I realized my family was still adjusting to the reality of my financial success. In their minds, I was probably still the struggling college dropout rather than a regional business owner with substantial earning potential. "The location works well for my business needs," I replied diplomatically. "Close enough to my primary stores for regular visits, but far enough from the day-to-day operations to maintain some work-life balance." We made small talk for a few more minutes before I invited everyone to sit down for dinner. The tamales had turned out perfectly, the masa light and flavorful, the pork filling tender and well-seasoned. As we passed dishes around the table, I felt some of the tension beginning to ease. "This is restaurant quality," Jessica said after her first bite. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "Necessity and practice," I replied. When you're living on a tight budget and working long hours, learning to cook well becomes essential for both nutrition and sanity. "You lived on a tight budget?" my mother asked, her voice carrying a note of concern that might have been maternal instinct or guilt. "For the first 2 years, yes. Starting a business requires significant upfront investment, and I was covering rent, inventory, equipment, and living expenses from my savings and whatever profit I could generate." The table grew quiet as my family absorbed this information. I realized they'd never really understood the practical realities of what I'd chosen to do. They'd seen my decision as reckless and impractical, but they hadn't considered the actual day-to-day challenges I'd faced. "How tight was tight?" Carlos asked gently. I considered how honest to be about those early struggles. Part of me wanted to protect them from feeling guilty about not offering help, but another part wanted them to understand what their lack of support had actually meant in concrete terms. There were months when I ate mostly rice, beans, and whatever produce was about to expire at the store, I said finally. I had a mattress on the floor and a card table for furniture. I walked to work to save gas money and bought my clothes at thrift stores. My mother's face paled. Maya, we had no idea it was that difficult. If we'd known, you would have what? I asked, not unkindly but with genuine curiosity. Offered to help? Tried to convince me to give up? What would have been different? The question hung in the air, challenging them to consider whether their response would have been supportive or patronizing. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and I could see him struggling with the implications of my words. I would have helped, he said finally. I was wrong to cut off financial support entirely. We should have found a way to be supportive even if we disagreed with your choices. But you didn't disagree with my choices, I replied, setting down my fork to look directly at him. You dismissed them entirely. There's a difference between disagreeing and refusing to acknowledge that someone else's perspective might have value. Jessica leaned forward, her lawyer instincts engaging. Maya, we were worried about you. From our perspective, you were throwing away guaranteed success for something that statistically was very likely to fail. We thought we were protecting you from making a huge mistake. And I appreciate that the concern came from love, I said. But protection that comes at the cost of respect and trust isn't really protection. It's control disguised as care. The conversation was moving into territory that felt both necessary and dangerous. We were finally addressing the fundamental issues that had driven us apart, but we were also risking the possibility that honest communication might reveal unbridgeable differences in our values and perspectives. Carlos broke the tension by asking about my expansion plans, shifting the conversation towards safer ground. I described the market research I was conducting for potential new locations, the demographic analysis that guided my site selection, and the operational challenges of managing multiple stores across different geographic regions. As I talked about my business, I watched my family's expression shift from polite interest to genuine engagement. They began asking increasingly sophisticated questions about supply chain management, employee retention strategies, and competitive positioning. For the first time, they were seeing me as a competent professional rather than their younger family member who'd made questionable choices. Your approach to franchise relationships is impressive, my father said as I described the balance between corporate guidelines and local autonomy. You found a way to leverage corporate resources while maintaining operational independence. That's sophisticated business thinking. The compliment felt good, but it also highlighted something important about our family dynamic. My father was capable of recognizing and respecting business competence, but he'd never extended that recognition to my original vision when it was still developing. He could appreciate my success, but he hadn't been able to support my process of building toward that success. Dad, I said carefully, I want you to understand something. The business thinking you're seeing now isn't new. It's the same thinking that drove my original decision to leave school and start my own operation. The only difference is that now you can see the concrete results. He considered this for a long moment, his expression thoughtful rather than defensive. You're saying I should have trusted your judgment from the beginning, even when I couldn't see how your plan would work. I'm saying that support and trust shouldn't be conditional on immediate proof of success, I replied. Sometimes people need to be believed in before they can prove themselves. My mother had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up. Maya, I want you to know that losing contact with you has been one of the most difficult experiences of my life. Not because of pride or embarrassment, but because I missed you. I missed knowing what was happening in your life, missed being able to share your struggles and celebrations. Her words carried an emotional weight that caught me off guard. I'd been focused on the business and philosophical aspects of our reconciliation, but she was addressing something more fundamental, the simple human cost of our estrangement. I missed you too, I admitted, but I was too angry and hurt to reach out, and too proud to risk being rejected again. We wouldn't have rejected you, Jessica said quickly. Wouldn't you? I challenged. If I'd called 2 years ago when I was struggling to keep my second store open, when I was working 18-hour days and barely breaking even, would you have offered encouragement? Or would you have suggested I give up and come home? The question forced them to confront their own assumptions and biases honestly. I could see each of them mentally reviewing their likely responses, and recognizing that I might be right about their probable reaction. "I don't know," Carlos said with characteristic honesty. "I'd like to think I would have been supportive, but given how we handled your original decision, I might have seen your struggles as confirmation that we'd been right to worry." His admission was both painful and refreshing. We were finally having the kind of honest conversation that had been impossible 4 years ago, when everyone was too invested in being right to consider the possibility of being wrong. We cleared the dinner dishes and moved to the living room for dessert and coffee. The tres leches cake was a success, moist and sweet with just enough cinnamon to add complexity to the flavor. As we ate, the conversation became more personal and less defensive. Jessica told me about her work at the law firm, her recent promotion to senior associate, and her growing interest in pro bono work that served underserved communities. Carlos described his clinical rotations, his plans for specializing in pediatric medicine, and his volunteer work at free clinics in underserved neighborhoods. I was struck by how much my siblings had grown during our time apart. They were still following conventional professional paths, but they developed genuine concern for social impact and community service that reflected values I could respect and admire. "It sounds like we've all learned something about the importance of serving communities that need advocacy and support," I observed. "Your pro bono work and Carlos's clinic volunteering, my focus on underserved retail markets, maybe we have more in common than I realized. Maybe our family values are stronger than our disagreements about how to express them," my mother suggested. The insight felt important. We'd all been pursuing different versions of meaningful work, different approaches to contributing positively to society. Our conflict had been about methods and paths, rather than fundamental values. But we'd allowed those differences to obscure our shared commitment to making a positive impact. As the evening wound down, my father asked if he could see some of the business awards and recognition certificates I'd displayed around the apartment. I walked him through the various honors, explaining the criteria for each award and describing the operational improvements that had earned the recognition. "This Community Service Award is particularly impressive," he said, studying a plaque from the Riverside Chamber of Commerce. "What did you do to earn this?" I described the food assistance program I'd developed for elderly customers, the scholarship fund I'd established for employees pursuing higher education, and the community meeting space I'd created in one of my larger stores. These initiatives weren't directly profitable, but they strengthened the connection between my businesses and the communities they served. "You've built something that goes beyond just generating profit," he said, and I could hear genuine admiration in his voice. "You've created real value for people who needed it." "That was always the goal," I replied. Sustainable business success comes from serving customer needs authentically, not from extracting maximum profit without regard for community impact. As my family prepared to leave, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically from the nervous tension of their arrival. We weren't fully reconciled, and there were still conversations we needed to have about rebuilding trust and establishing new patterns of communication. But we'd made a start. Carlos hugged me goodbye and asked if he could visit one of my stores during his upcoming break from medical school. Jessica requested my phone number and promised to call regularly rather than waiting for major life events to prompt contact. My parents were more formal but warmer than they'd been in years. "Thank you for giving us this opportunity," my mother said as she embraced me. "I know we haven't earned the right to be part of your life again, but I'm grateful you're willing to let us try." "We all made mistakes," I replied, "but we're all different people than we were 4 years ago. Maybe we can build something better than what we had before." After they left, I cleaned up the dinner dishes and reflected on how the evening had gone. The conversation had been difficult but necessary, honest but respectful. We'd acknowledged the pain and mistakes of the past without getting trapped in blame or defensiveness. Most importantly, we'd begun to see each other as adults with different but valid perspectives, rather than as family members locked into childhood roles and expectations. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Thank you for tonight. I'm proud of what you've built, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see it clearly." Carlos sent a message a few minutes later. "That was the best family dinner we've had in years. I love you, and I respect what you've accomplished." My parents' text was more formal but equally meaningful. "We're grateful for your hospitality and impressed by what you've achieved. We look forward to rebuilding our relationship with the remarkable woman you've become." I sat on my couch, looking out at the city lights and processing the complex emotions the evening had generated. Relief was the strongest feeling, the sense of finally being seen and understood by people whose opinions had mattered to me more than I'd wanted to admit. But there was also sadness for the years we'd lost, the milestones we hadn't shared, and the support that hadn't been available when I'd needed it most. The reconciliation felt real but fragile, built on mutual recognition of past mistakes and shared commitment to doing better going forward. We'd established a foundation for rebuilding our relationships, but the actual reconstruction would require patience, consistency, and continued honest communication. Monday morning brought me back to the familiar rhythms of business management, but with a lighter heart than I'd carried in years. Amanda called during my drive to the first store visit of the day, and I found myself sharing details about the dinner that I wouldn't have been comfortable discussing even a week earlier. "How do you feel about how it went?" she asked. "Hopeful," I said, somewhat to my own surprise. "We still have work to do, but we're talking to each other honestly for the first time in years. That feels like progress." "It sounds like they finally understand what you've built and why it matters," Amanda observed. "More than that," I replied, pulling into the parking lot of our Moreno Valley location. "They're beginning to understand who I've become, and I'm beginning to remember who they are beyond the roles they played in our conflict." The week that followed was busy but productive. I completed quarterly reviews for all 15 store managers, finalized supplier contracts for the upcoming season, and attended a franchise owners conference in Los Angeles, where I was asked to present a workshop on community engagement strategies. But the real difference was in my personal life. Carlos called twice during the week, sharing stories about his clinical rotations and asking for advice about a small business investment he was considering. Jessica sent articles about retail industry trends she thought might interest me, and we exchanged several long text conversations about work-life balance and career satisfaction. My parents were more cautious in their outreach, but they sent a formal thank you note for the dinner and asked if they could take me to lunch the following weekend. The invitation felt like a recognition that rebuilding our relationship would require ongoing effort rather than just a single conversation. 2 weeks after the family dinner, I received a call that would test how much our relationships had actually changed. It was my mother, and her voice carried the kind of urgency that immediately put me on alert. "Maya, I need to ask you a favor, and I want you to know that it's okay to say no if it doesn't work for your schedule or your business." The preamble suggested this was going to be significant. "What do you need, Mom?" "Your father's firm is hosting a client appreciation event next month, and several of our clients have been asking about meeting you. Word has gotten around about your success, and people are curious about your business model and expansion strategies." I felt my stomach tighten. This sounded uncomfortably similar to the kind of performance request I'd specifically said I wouldn't accept during our family dinner conversation. "Mom, I told you I wasn't interested in being paraded around as the family success story." "I know, and that's not what this would be," she said quickly. "This would be a legitimate business networking opportunity. These are established business owners who are genuinely interested in retail strategies and franchise development. It would be mutually beneficial professional contact, not social showboating." I considered her request carefully. The distinction she was drawing was important. If these were serious business professionals with genuine interest in industry insights, then participating in their event would be meaningful networking rather than family exhibition. "Who specifically has asked to meet me?" I pressed. She provided names of several business owners I recognized from local industry publications. These were people who ran substantial operations and served on various commercial development boards. Meeting them could indeed be valuable for my own expansion planning and community engagement goals. "I'll consider it," I said finally. "But I want to be clear about the terms. If I participate, it's as a business professional sharing industry insights, not as the family member who proved everyone wrong. The conversation needs to focus on retail strategies and community development, not on our family dynamics or personal history." "Absolutely," my mother agreed. "That's exactly what we had in mind. And if anyone treats this as an opportunity to congratulate you and Dad on raising a successful daughter, I'm leaving immediately." Understood completely. I agreed to attend the event, but with significant anxiety about how it would actually unfold. This would be the first time I'd appeared publicly in a context that connected me to my family's business and social network. It felt like a test of whether our reconciliation was genuine, or whether my family was still primarily interested in my success as it reflected on them. The client appreciation event was held at an upscale restaurant in La Jolla, the kind of place where San Diego's established business community gathered for networking dinners and professional social events. I arrived wearing a conservative business suit, carrying materials about my retail operations, and prepared to discuss industry trends and expansion strategies. My parents introduced me professionally to their clients, emphasizing my business achievements rather than our family relationship. The conversation quickly turned to substantive topics: retail market analysis, franchise development strategies, customer retention approaches, and community engagement programs. I found myself enjoying the discussions more than I'd expected. These were experienced business professionals who asked intelligent questions and offered valuable insights from their own industries. The networking was genuinely beneficial, and several attendees expressed interest in potential partnership opportunities for community development projects. But the real test came when one of my father's longtime clients, a man named Richard Morrison who owned several commercial properties, made a comment that revealed the underlying dynamic I'd been worried about. "David, you must be incredibly proud of Maya's success," he said during a lull in the business conversation. "It must be gratifying to see your business acumen reflected in the next generation." The comment was exactly what I'd been dreading. Credit to my father for my achievements, as if my success was somehow his accomplishment. I felt my jaw tighten and prepared to correct the mischaracterization. But my father spoke first. "Actually, Richard, Maya's success reflects her own judgment and hard work," he said clearly. "She built her business despite my initial skepticism, not because of my guidance. If anything, I learned from watching her approach to community-focused retail, rather than the other way around. The correction was public, honest, and gave me credit where it was due rather than deflecting it to himself. It was exactly the kind of response I'd hoped for but hadn't been sure I could expect. In fact," my father continued, "Maya's approach to franchise development has given me insights that I've applied to my own client relationships. She's taught me about the importance of understanding local market needs rather than applying standardized solutions." The evening continued with more substantive business discussions, and I left feeling that the event had been a genuine professional success rather than a family publicity exercise. My parents had maintained appropriate boundaries, given me credit for my own achievements, and created legitimate business networking opportunities. Driving home, I realized that my family's approach to this event demonstrated real change in how they understood my relationship to my success and their role in my life. They were learning to be proud of me without taking credit for my achievements, and to support my professional goals without treating me as an extension of their own aspirations. The progress felt significant and authentic. We were building something new together, based on mutual respect and understanding rather than traditional family hierarchies and expectations. It wasn't perfect, and there would undoubtedly be more challenges ahead, but it felt sustainable in a way that our previous relationship never had. 3 months after the client appreciation event, I received a phone call that would change everything about how I understood my role in the community and my relationship with my past. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was reviewing inventory reports in my office when Amanda called with news that initially seemed routine but would prove to be anything but. "Maya, I just got off the phone with corporate headquarters," she said, her voice carrying an excitement I rarely heard from her. "They want to nominate you for the National Franchise Leadership Award. It's given annually to one franchise partner who demonstrates exceptional business performance, community impact, and innovative operational strategies." I set down my coffee cup and leaned back in my chair. The National Franchise Leadership Award was something I'd heard about, but never seriously considered pursuing. Winners were typically franchise owners with decades of experience and hundreds of locations under their management. "Amanda, I've only been in the system for 3 years," I pointed out. "Aren't there more established partners who would be better candidates?" "That's exactly why they're interested in you," she replied. "Your growth trajectory is unprecedented, but more importantly, your approach to community integration and employee development has become a model that other regions are trying to replicate. Corporate wants to recognize innovation, not just longevity." The nomination process would require extensive documentation of my business practices, financial performance, and community impact initiatives. I would need to present my operational philosophy to a panel of corporate executives and industry experts, and if selected as a finalist, I would be invited to speak at the National Franchise Conference in Chicago. "What's the timeline?" I asked, my mind already racing through the implications. Nominations are due in 6 weeks. The selection committee meets in early spring, and the award presentation is at the conference in May. Maya, this could position you for even larger expansion opportunities. Regional ownership partnerships, corporate consulting roles, maybe even your own franchise development company. The possibilities Amanda outlined were exciting but also overwhelming. I'd built my business gradually, focusing on operational excellence and community service rather than rapid expansion or industry recognition. The idea of becoming a public figure in the franchise industry felt both appealing and terrifying. I'll need to think about this, I said finally. It's a significant commitment, and I want to make sure I'm doing it for the right reasons, of course. But Maya, you should know that this nomination didn't come from me pushing your candidacy. Corporate has been watching your performance metrics and community impact scores for months. This recognition is something you've earned through consistent excellence. After we hung up, I spent the rest of the morning considering what accepting the nomination would mean. On one hand, it represented validation of everything I'd worked to build, and an opportunity to share my approach with other franchise owners who might benefit from community-focused strategies. On the other hand, it would require a level of public exposure that made me uncomfortable and might fundamentally change my role from operator to spokesperson. I decided to visit several of my stores and talk with employees about their perspectives on our operations. If I was going to represent our approach to a national audience, I wanted to understand how the people who implemented my strategies every day viewed their effectiveness and impact. My first stop was the Moreno Valley location, where I found Sandra Martinez, one of my assistant managers, training a new employee on customer service protocols. Sandra had been with the company for 2 years, starting as a part-time cashier and working her way up through demonstrated leadership and commitment to our operational standards. Sandra, can I ask you something? I said during a break in the training session. If someone asked you to describe what makes this store different from other places you've worked, what would you tell them? She considered the question thoughtfully. I think it's that we're encouraged to actually care about customers instead of just processing transactions. When Mrs. Chen comes in every Thursday to buy groceries for her elderly mother, we make sure to set aside the freshest produce for her. When the Johnson family was going through financial difficulties, we helped them understand which products offered the best nutritional value for their budget. Do you think that approach affects business performance? I pressed. Absolutely. People shop here because they know we'll treat them well, not just because our prices are competitive. We have customers who drive past 3 other grocery stores to come here because they trust us to take care of them properly. Her response reinforced something I'd believed from the beginning. Authentic customer service wasn't just morally right, it was also good business. But hearing it articulated by someone who implemented these policies daily gave me confidence that our approach was sustainable and replicable. I had similar conversations with employees at 4 other locations, and the consistency of their responses was striking. Everyone understood and embraced the community-focused philosophy, and they could provide specific examples of how it translated into better customer relationships and stronger business performance. That evening, I called Carlos to discuss the award nomination. Since our reconciliation, he'd become one of my most trusted advisors on decisions that involved balancing personal values with professional opportunities. The recognition sounds incredible, he said after I'd explained the situation. But I can hear hesitation in your voice. What's worrying you? I'm concerned that accepting this award might change the fundamental nature of what I do, I replied. Right now, I'm a franchise owner who happens to be successful. If I become the poster child for innovative franchise development, will I still be able to focus on actual operations? Or will I become a professional speaker who used to run grocery stores? Carlos laughed. Maya, you're overthinking this. Awards don't change who you are unless you let them. You can accept recognition for your work while continuing to do the work that earned the recognition. But what if the visibility leads to opportunities that pull me away from direct operational involvement? What if I become so focused on teaching other people how to run stores that I lose touch with the day-to-day realities of actually running stores? Then you'll have to make choices about which opportunities align with your values and which ones don't, he said pragmatically. But you don't have to make those decisions now. You can accept this nomination, see where it leads, and maintain control over your own career trajectory. His perspective helped clarify my thinking. I was creating problems that didn't exist yet, while potentially passing up an opportunity to share knowledge and strategies that could benefit other franchise owners and their communities. I called Amanda the next morning and accepted the nomination. The application process was extensive, requiring detailed financial reports, customer satisfaction data, employee retention statistics, and comprehensive documentation of community impact initiatives. I spent 2 weeks compiling information and writing essays that explained my operational philosophy and strategic approach. The most challenging part of the application was the personal statement that asked nominees to describe their journey to franchise ownership and the experiences that shaped their business philosophy. I found myself revisiting the early days in Phoenix, the struggles and failures that had taught me resilience, and the gradual development of confidence that had enabled me to take increasingly significant risks. Writing about my family estrangement and reconciliation was particularly difficult. The application asked about support systems and mentorship relationships, and I wasn't sure how to honestly address the fact that I'd built my business entirely without family support and had only recently begun rebuilding those relationships. I decided to be completely honest about the challenges while focusing on how they'd contributed to my independence and self-reliance. I wrote about learning to trust my own judgment, developing resilience through adversity, and discovering that authentic success came from staying true to personal values, even when others questioned or criticized those choices. The completed application was 47 pages long and represented the most comprehensive analysis I'd ever done of my own business practices and professional development. Submitting it felt both vulnerable and empowering, like putting my entire professional identity up for evaluation by people whose judgment I respected. 6 weeks later, Amanda called with news that I'd been selected as one of 5 finalists for the award. The next phase would involve a presentation to the selection committee in Chicago, followed by interviews with corporate executives and industry analysts. "Maya, this is huge," Amanda said, her excitement palpable. "Being selected as a finalist is an achievement in itself. Only 5 people out of hundreds of nominees make it to this level." The presentation would need to be 20 minutes long, followed by a 30-minute question and answer session. I would be expected to explain my operational strategies, demonstrate their effectiveness through concrete metrics, and articulate how my approach could be adapted by other franchise owners in different markets. I spent 3 weeks preparing for the presentation, working with a professional coach who helped me organize my thoughts and develop visual materials that would support my key points. The process forced me to think systematically about elements of my business approach that I'd developed intuitively over time. The trip to Chicago was my first time traveling for business purposes rather than operational necessity. I stayed in a downtown hotel near the corporate headquarters, and the night before my presentation, I walked through the city thinking about how much my life had changed since those early days, when I could barely afford to travel between my Phoenix stores. The presentation went better than I'd expected. The selection committee was engaged and asked thoughtful questions about scalability, replication challenges, and measurable outcomes. I felt confident discussing my strategies because they were based on years of practical experience rather than theoretical concepts. One committee member asked about the role of personal background in shaping business philosophy, and I found myself talking about the value of understanding what it felt like to be underestimated or overlooked. "When you've experienced being dismissed based on assumptions about your potential," I said, "you develop sensitivity to ensuring that others aren't treated the same way. That translates into better customer service and more inclusive hiring practices." Another committee member was interested in the financial sustainability of community-focused initiatives. I was able to provide specific data showing that customer retention rates, employee satisfaction scores, and profitability metrics were all higher in my stores than the regional averages, demonstrating that ethical business practices were also effective business practices. The interview portion of the day was equally engaging. Corporate executives asked about expansion plans, operational challenges, and my long-term vision for franchise development. I talked about the potential for creating regional networks of community-focused stores that could compete effectively with large corporate chains while maintaining local responsiveness and authentic customer relationships. Flying back to California, I felt energized by the conversations and excited about the possibilities they'd revealed. Win or lose, the nomination process had helped me articulate my business philosophy more clearly and think strategically about future opportunities. 2 weeks later, Amanda called with the results. "Maya, you won. The National Franchise Leadership Award is yours. Congratulations on an incredible achievement." The news was overwhelming. I sat in my office, looking out at one of my stores, watching customers and employees going about their daily routines, and feeling a mixture of pride, gratitude, and responsibility. This recognition wasn't just about my individual success. It was validation of an approach that prioritized community service and authentic relationships in an industry often focused solely on efficiency and profit maximization. The awards ceremony would be held at the national conference in May, where I would be expected to give a keynote address to an audience of over 2,000 franchise owners, corporate executives, and industry professionals. The speech would be my opportunity to share the strategies and insights that had contributed to my success, and to encourage other business owners to consider community impact as a core component of operational planning. I spent the next month preparing for the keynote, working with the same presentation coach who'd helped me with the finalist presentation. The challenge was creating a speech that would be inspiring without being preachy, practical without being overly technical, and personal without being self-aggrandizing. I decided to structure the presentation around 3 key themes: the business value of authentic customer relationships, the importance of employee development and empowerment, and the long-term benefits of community integration. Each theme would be supported by specific examples from my own operations and concrete data demonstrating measurable outcomes. But I also wanted to address the personal dimension of business leadership, the reality that professional success required staying true to individual values, even when those values weren't conventional or immediately profitable. I planned to talk about the importance of resilience, the value of learning from failure, and the necessity of building support systems that could sustain long-term growth. The week before the conference, I received a call from Jessica that surprised me. "Maya, I've been following the news about your award, and I want you to know how proud I am of what you've accomplished. But more than that, I want to ask if you'd like some company at the conference." The offer was unexpected. Jessica had never shown interest in my business, beyond polite family conversation, and I wasn't sure what had prompted her to want to attend an industry event. "That's very kind of you to offer," I said carefully, "but it's a franchise industry conference. Most of the content will be pretty specialized for retail operations." "I know," she replied, "but I've been thinking about what you said during our family dinner about building something meaningful that serves communities. I'm considering making some changes in my own career, focusing more on legal work that has direct community impact. I thought attending your conference might help me understand how business success and social responsibility can be integrated effectively." Her explanation made sense, and I realized that my own example might be influencing my family members to reconsider their own career priorities. The idea of having Jessica there for moral support was also appealing, especially since public speaking at this level was still intimidating, despite my growing confidence. "I'd love to have you there," I said, "but fair warning, there will be a lot of discussion about inventory management and supplier relationships." She laughed. "I can handle boring business talk if it means getting to see my sister receive a major industry award." Jessica flew to Chicago the day before my keynote, and we had dinner at a restaurant near the conference hotel. It was the first time we'd spent extended one-on-one time together since our reconciliation, and I was struck by how much more comfortable our relationship had become. "I've been reading about your business approach," she said over appetizers. "The customer service training programs, the employee scholarship fund, the community meeting spaces in your larger stores. It's impressive how you've integrated social responsibility into standard business operations." "It's not really about social responsibility," I replied. "It's about understanding that businesses exist within communities, and long-term success requires contributing positively to those communities, rather than just extracting profit from them." "That's a sophisticated perspective," Jessica observed. "Where did you learn to think about business in those terms?" I considered her question, tracing back through my experiences to identify the sources of my operational philosophy. Probably from watching small businesses struggle during my early days in Phoenix. I saw store owners who were working incredibly hard but failing because they were focused solely on immediate transactions, rather than building lasting relationships. I realized that sustainable success required a different approach. And now you're being recognized nationally for developing that approach. It feels surreal, I admitted. 4 years ago, I was a college dropout living in a trailer and struggling to keep one small store profitable. Now I'm about to give a keynote speech to 2,000 industry professionals about best practices for franchise development. Maya, Jessica said, leaning forward intently, I want you to know something. Watching your journey has changed how I think about my own career and what constitutes meaningful success. You've shown that it's possible to build something significant while staying true to your values, and that's inspiring in ways that go beyond just business achievement. Her words meant more to me than any industry recognition could. Having my sister's respect and understanding felt like the completion of a circle that had been broken 4 years earlier when I'd chosen my unconventional path. The day of the keynote arrived gray and rainy, typical Chicago spring weather. I woke up early and spent an hour reviewing my speech notes, practicing key transitions, and visualizing the presentation going smoothly. Jessica had breakfast with me and offered to walk through my main points one more time, but I felt as prepared as I could be. The conference center was massive, and the main auditorium where I would be speaking could seat 3,000 people. Standing on the stage during the sound check, looking out at the empty seats that would soon be filled with industry professionals, I felt a mixture of excitement and terror that reminded me of my early days when every new challenge seemed impossibly large. Amanda arrived an hour before the presentation to provide moral support and last-minute coordination with the conference organizers. How are you feeling? She asked as we reviewed the logistics. Ready, I said and realized I meant it. Nervous, but ready. The auditorium filled quickly as the keynote time approached. I watched from backstage as franchise owners, corporate executives, and industry analysts took their seats, many of them people I recognized from trade publications and business media. The audience represented decades of combined experience in retail operations and franchise development. The introduction felt endless. A recitation of my achievements and qualifications that made my success sound more impressive and inevitable than it had felt while I was living through it. When I finally walked onto the stage, the applause was warm and encouraging, and I could see Jessica in the third row giving me a thumbs up. I began the speech by acknowledging the honor of receiving the award and expressing gratitude to the people who had supported my development as a business owner. Then I shifted into the core content, starting with a story about Mrs. Chen, the elderly customer whose weekly shopping trips had taught me about the importance of understanding individual customer needs. Mrs. Chen taught me that retail success isn't about processing transactions efficiently, I said. It's about understanding that every customer interaction is an opportunity to demonstrate care, build trust, and strengthen community connections. When we treat customers as individuals with specific needs and preferences rather than as generic revenue sources, we create loyalty that transcends price competition. I shared data showing how customer retention rates improved when employees were trained to recognize regular customers, remember their preferences, and provide personalized service. I described the financial benefits of investing in employee development and empowerment, demonstrating that stores with engaged, well-trained staff consistently outperformed locations that focused solely on operational efficiency. The community integration portion of the speech drew the strongest audience response. I talked about the community meeting spaces I'd created in larger stores, the local supplier partnerships that supported regional economic development, and the scholarship programs that invested franchise profits back into the communities we served. Business success and community impact aren't competing priorities, I emphasized. They're complementary strategies that reinforce each other over time. When we invest in the communities where we operate, we create stronger customer relationships, more loyal employees, and more sustainable long-term growth. The question and answer session was energetic and engaging. Franchise owners asked about implementation strategies, cost considerations, and scalability challenges. Corporate executives were interested in metrics and measurement approaches. Industry analysts wanted to understand how community-focused strategies affected competitive positioning. One question came from a franchise owner in rural Montana who was struggling with customer retention in a market dominated by large chain stores. I talked about the advantages that independent operators could leverage: flexibility in product selection, responsiveness to local preferences, and the ability to provide personalized service that large chains couldn't match efficiently. Your challenge isn't to compete with chain stores on their terms, I told him. It's to offer something they can't: authentic relationships, community connection, and genuine care for individual customer needs. That's not just good business philosophy, it's a sustainable competitive advantage. The presentation concluded with sustained applause and a standing ovation that lasted longer than I'd expected. As I walked off the stage, I felt a profound sense of completion, as if I'd successfully communicated something important about the relationship between business success and personal values. Jessica was waiting for me backstage, tears in her eyes and pride evident on her face. "Maya, that was incredible. You didn't just talk about business strategies. You articulated a philosophy of leadership that was inspiring and practical at the same time." Amanda was equally enthusiastic. "Maya, I've been to dozens of these conferences, and I've never seen an audience respond like that. You've given people a framework for thinking about their businesses in ways that feel both profitable and meaningful." The rest of the conference was a blur of networking conversations, interview requests, and follow-up discussions with franchise owners who wanted to implement similar strategies in their own operations. I exchanged contact information with dozens of people and committed to serving as a mentor for several emerging franchise operators who were interested in community-focused approaches. But the most meaningful conversation came during the final reception, when a young woman approached me with a story that reminded me of my own journey. She was 24 years old, recently graduated from business school, and considering franchise ownership despite family pressure to pursue a more traditional corporate career. "I've been watching your presentation online," she said, "and I wanted to thank you for showing that it's possible to build something successful while staying true to your values. My family thinks I'm crazy for wanting to open my own business instead of taking a job at a consulting firm, but seeing your success gives me confidence that I'm making the right choice." I spent 20 minutes talking with her about the challenges and rewards of entrepreneurship, the importance of building support systems, and the necessity of maintaining faith in your own judgment, even when others question your decisions. Watching her face light up as we discussed her plans, I realized that receiving recognition for my achievements was satisfying, but helping others pursue their own authentic paths was deeply fulfilling. Flying back to California with Jessica, I reflected on how much my relationship with success had evolved. 4 years ago, I'd been driven primarily by the need to prove that my unconventional choices were valid. Now, success felt less about personal validation and more about creating opportunities for meaningful work, community impact, and authentic relationships. "What's next?" Jessica asked as our plane descended toward Los Angeles. "More of the same, I think," I replied. "Better operations, stronger community connections, continued growth that serves customers and employees well. The recognition is wonderful, but the real work is still running great stores and building sustainable relationships." "That sounds like the Maya I've always known," she said with a smile, focused on substance rather than style. "Is that how you see me?" "It's how I've always seen you, even when I was too stubborn to appreciate it properly." The conversation reminded me that authentic success wasn't just about achieving professional goals. It was about becoming someone whose personal and professional values were aligned, whose work contributed positively to the world, and whose relationships were based on mutual respect and understanding. Back in Riverside, I returned to the familiar routines of store visits, employee meetings, and operational planning. But there was something different about how I approached these activities. The national recognition had given me confidence that my methods were not just personally satisfying but also professionally valid and broadly applicable. I began receiving invitations to speak at other conferences, consultation requests from franchise owners across the country, and offers to participate in industry advisory committees. I accepted some of these opportunities while declining others, using my original criteria. Would this work contribute to better customer service, stronger communities, or more meaningful employment opportunities? The balance felt sustainable. I could share my knowledge and experience with other business owners while maintaining my primary focus on direct operations and community service. Recognition had opened new doors, but I remained committed to walking through only those that aligned with my fundamental values and long-term goals. 6 months after the Chicago conference, I realized that winning the National Franchise Leadership Award had been less about receiving recognition and more about clarifying my understanding of what I wanted my work to accomplish. Success felt less fragile and more purposeful. less dependent on external validation, and more rooted in authentic contribution to the communities I served. The work continued, but it continued with greater confidence, broader impact, and deeper satisfaction than I'd thought possible when I'd first driven away from San Diego in my beat-up Honda Civic, with nothing but determination and a belief that meaningful work was worth pursuing, regardless of others' opinions. That belief had proven correct, but in ways that were more complex, challenging, and ultimately rewarding than I could have imagined when the journey began. The year following my keynote speech brought changes I hadn't anticipated when I first started rebuilding relationships with my family. Corporate offered me a position as Director of Franchise Development, which would have meant relocating to Seattle and transitioning from direct store operations to consulting and training. The salary was substantial, the prestige significant, but something about the offer felt wrong for my long-term goals. I was sitting in my office at the Riverside location, reviewing the formal job proposal, when Kevin knocked on my door. In the 18 months since our infamous first meeting, he had transformed into one of my most effective managers, implementing customer service improvements that other stores had begun adopting as standard practice. "Maya, do you have a few minutes?" he asked, holding a folder of paperwork. "I wanted to discuss something with you." Kevin had become comfortable approaching me directly with operational questions and suggestions, a far cry from the nervous anxiety he'd displayed during our early interactions. His customer service scores were now among the highest in our region, and his employee retention rates had improved dramatically. "What's on your mind?" I asked, setting aside the corporate offer. "I've been thinking about your speech at the Chicago conference," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "I watched the video online, and something you said about authentic leadership really resonated with me. I was curious where this conversation was heading." Kevin rarely initiated discussions about business philosophy, preferring to focus on practical operational matters. "You talked about how real leadership means creating opportunities for other people to succeed rather than just advancing your own career," he continued. "It made me realize that I want to do more than just manage a single store efficiently." He opened his folder and pulled out what appeared to be a business plan. "I've been working on a proposal for a management training program that could help other store managers develop the kind of customer-focused approach we've implemented here. Not just the technical skills, but the mindset and values that make the techniques effective." I was impressed by both the initiative and the insight. Kevin had identified something that corporate training programs often missed: the importance of internal motivation and authentic commitment to customer service, rather than just procedural compliance. "Tell me more about your concept," I said, genuinely interested in his perspective. Kevin spent the next 20 minutes outlining a comprehensive training approach that combined practical skills development with discussions about personal values, community responsibility, and long-term career satisfaction. His plan included mentorship components, ongoing support systems, and measurement strategies that would track both performance improvements and employee engagement. "Kevin, this is sophisticated thinking," I said after reviewing his materials. "Have you considered that implementing something like this might require you to take on regional responsibilities rather than just local store management?" His face lit up with an enthusiasm I'd rarely seen from him. "Actually, that's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. I know I need more experience before I could handle something that significant, but I'm willing to work toward it systematically." The conversation gave me an idea that would ultimately influence my decision about the corporate job offer. Instead of accepting a position that would take me away from direct operations, what if I could create a role that allowed me to develop talent within my existing region while expanding the impact of community-focused business practices? That evening, I called Amanda to discuss an alternative proposal I wanted to present to corporate. Rather than relocating to Seattle for a traditional consulting role, I wanted to establish a regional training and development center that could serve franchise owners across the Southwest while maintaining my operational responsibilities. "Maya, that's an intriguing concept," Amanda said after I'd outlined my thinking. "Corporate has been looking for ways to replicate your success in other markets, but they've struggled with implementation because the strategies seem so dependent on your personal approach and local market knowledge." "Exactly," I replied. Rather than trying to systematize community-focused strategies into standardized corporate training, we could create a regional center where franchise owners could come for intensive hands-on learning. They could work directly with successful operations, observe customer interactions, and understand how theoretical concepts translate into daily practice. The idea excited me because it would allow me to share knowledge and mentor emerging franchise owners while remaining connected to the operational realities that kept my strategies grounded and effective. It would also create advancement opportunities for managers like Kevin who had developed expertise in customer-focused operations. Amanda agreed to present the concept to corporate leadership, and I spent the following weeks developing a comprehensive proposal that outlined the training center concept, potential participants, expected outcomes, and financial projections. The plan was ambitious but realistic, building on existing successful operations rather than creating entirely new structures. While I waited for corporate's response, I decided to host a small test program to demonstrate the concept's viability. I invited 6 franchise owners from across California and Arizona to spend a week at my Riverside location, observing operations, participating in customer service training, and working directly with my management team. The pilot program exceeded my expectations. Participants were engaged and enthusiastic, asking thoughtful questions and providing valuable feedback about how the strategies might be adapted for their specific markets. More importantly, they left with concrete implementation plans and ongoing support relationships with my staff. One participant, Maria Santos, owned 3 stores in rural Northern California and had been struggling with customer retention in communities where large chain stores dominated the market. During her week in Riverside, she worked extensively with Kevin on developing personalized customer service approaches that could differentiate her stores from corporate competitors. "Maya, this experience has been transformative," Maria told me on her final day. "I've been so focused on operational efficiency that I lost sight of why efficiency matters. Watching your team interact with customers reminded me that the goal isn't just to process transactions quickly, it's to create positive experiences that people want to repeat." Another participant, David Kim, managed stores in urban markets where customer demographics were rapidly changing. He spent time with Sandra Martinez learning about cultural sensitivity training and community outreach strategies that could help his stores better serve diverse populations. "The technical training I've received from corporate has been valuable," David said, "but this program addressed the human elements that make technical skills effective. I feel like I understand my role as a community business leader rather than just a retail manager." The feedback from all 6 participants was overwhelmingly positive, and several asked when they could send additional managers for similar training. More importantly, preliminary performance data from their stores showed measurable improvements in customer satisfaction scores and employee engagement levels within 3 months of their return. Corporate's response to my regional training center proposal was enthusiastic but complex. They loved the concept and wanted to fund a full-scale implementation, but they also wanted to expand it beyond the Southwest region and integrate it into their national franchise development strategy. "Maya, we think you've identified something important," said Robert Chen, the Vice President of Franchise Operations, during a conference call. "This kind of immersive, values-based training could revolutionize how we develop franchise partners. We want to support your pilot program, but we also want to explore how it could be scaled nationally." The conversation revealed an opportunity that was both exciting and challenging. Corporate was offering significant funding and resources to expand the training center concept, but they were also suggesting that I consider transitioning to a national role that would involve traveling extensively and developing similar programs in other regions. I asked for time to consider their proposal, recognizing that this decision would fundamentally shape the direction of my career and the nature of my work. I could remain focused on my current region and maintain direct operational control, or I could accept a broader role that would allow me to influence franchise development nationally but would require giving up day-to-day store management. The decision felt similar to the choice I'd faced 5 years earlier when I'd left college to start my own business. Then, I'd chosen the uncertain path that aligned with my values over the secure option that others expected me to pursue. Now, I was facing a different version of the same fundamental question: what kind of work would be most meaningful and sustainable for my long-term goals? I spent several weeks visiting all 15 of my stores, talking with managers and employees about their perspectives on potential changes. I also had extensive conversations with my family, whose support and insight had become important factors in my decision-making process. Carlos provided the most helpful perspective during one of our regular coffee meetings. "Maya, you've proven that you can succeed at whatever you choose to pursue," he said. "The question isn't whether you're capable of handling a national role, it's whether that role would allow you to do the kind of work that gives your life meaning." "What do you think that work is?" I asked, genuinely curious about his perception. "Building authentic relationships and creating opportunities for other people to succeed," he replied without hesitation. "Whether you do that through managing 15 stores or consulting with franchise owners nationwide, the core purpose remains the same." Jessica offered a different, but equally valuable perspective. "Maya, you have a gift for seeing potential in people and helping them develop that potential effectively. Kevin is a perfect example. 18 months ago, he was a competent but unremarkable store manager. Now he's developing training programs that could benefit hundreds of other managers. But I worry that a national role might dilute that impact," I said. "Instead of developing deep relationships with a smaller number of people, I might end up having superficial interactions with larger numbers of people." "Not necessarily," Jessica countered. "If you design the role correctly, you could create systems that allow for meaningful mentorship relationships while reaching more people. It's about structure and intention rather than just scale." My parents' perspective was characteristically practical. My father focused on the financial and career advancement aspects of the opportunity, while my mother emphasized the potential for broader community impact. "Maya, this kind of national role could position you to influence business practices across the entire industry," my mother pointed out. "Think about how many communities could benefit if hundreds of franchise owners adopted your approach to customer service and community engagement." "But I also understand your hesitation," my father added. "There's satisfaction in direct operational control that you might miss if you transition to a consulting role. You need to honestly assess whether you're ready for that kind of change." Their insights helped me clarify my own thinking. I realized that my reluctance wasn't about the scope of the opportunity, but about maintaining authentic connection to the work that had originally motivated me. I wanted to ensure that any new role would allow me to continue building meaningful relationships and creating tangible community impact, rather than just developing strategies and systems. I decided to propose a hybrid approach to corporate. Instead of choosing between local operations and national consulting, I would maintain ownership of my current stores while establishing the regional training center and taking on limited national responsibilities. This structure would allow me to test whether I could scale my impact effectively while preserving the operational experience that kept my strategies grounded and authentic. The negotiations with corporate took several months, but we eventually reached an agreement that satisfied both my desire for continued operational involvement and their interest in broader program development. I would retain ownership of my 15 stores, establish the Southwest Training Center for Franchise Excellence, and commit to developing similar programs in 2 additional regions over the following 3 years. The arrangement also included funding for hiring and training additional management staff who could handle increased operational responsibilities, while I focused on program development and mentorship activities. Kevin was promoted to Regional Operations Manager, and Sandra Martinez became the Southwest Training Center's Director of Community Engagement. Implementing the expanded program required careful planning and significant organizational changes. I hired 2 additional assistant managers for my stores, developed comprehensive training materials for the regional center, and established partnerships with local business schools that could provide ongoing support for program participants. The first full-scale training cohort included 20 franchise owners from across the Southwest, representing various market sizes and demographic compositions. The program lasted 2 weeks and combined classroom instruction with hands-on operational experience, mentorship relationships, and ongoing support networks. The diversity of participants created rich learning opportunities that benefited everyone involved. Franchise owners from urban markets shared strategies for serving diverse customer bases, while those from rural areas discussed approaches for competing with large chain stores. Established operators mentored newer franchise owners, while recent business school graduates brought fresh perspectives on industry trends and technological innovations. One of the most rewarding aspects of the expanded program was watching participants develop authentic relationships with each other that extended beyond the formal training period. They created informal support networks, shared best practices through regular communication, and even developed joint purchasing relationships that benefited their individual operations. Maria Santos, who had participated in the original pilot program, returned as a mentor for newer franchise owners. Her stores had shown remarkable improvement in customer retention and profitability, and she was eager to share the strategies that had contributed to her success. Maya, participating in this program, didn't just improve my business performance. She told me during the second cohort's graduation ceremony. It helped me understand my role as a community leader and gave me confidence to pursue opportunities I wouldn't have considered before. Maria had recently been elected to her city's Small Business Development Council and was working with local officials to create a merchant association that could support independent retailers in competing with large chain stores. Her community engagement reflected exactly the kind of broader impact I'd hoped the training program could generate. The success of the Southwest Training Center attracted attention from franchise owners in other regions, and corporate began receiving requests for similar programs in markets across the country. Within 18 months, I was consulting on the development of training centers in Colorado, Texas, and Oregon, each adapted to local market conditions while maintaining core principles of community engagement and authentic customer service. The national expansion required extensive travel and coordination, but I found the work energizing rather than exhausting. Each new region presented unique challenges and opportunities that deepened my understanding of how community-focused business strategies could be adapted to different cultural and economic contexts. Working with franchise owners in rural Colorado taught me about the importance of seasonal market fluctuations and agricultural community relationships. Developing programs in urban Texas highlighted strategies for serving rapidly growing populations with diverse cultural backgrounds. The Oregon expansion focused on sustainability initiatives and environmental consciousness that resonated with Pacific Northwest values. Each regional program maintained its own character while sharing fundamental principles about treating customers as individuals, investing in employee development, and contributing positively to local communities. The variety kept my work interesting and prevented the standardization that might have made the programs less effective or authentic. 2 years after launching the Southwest Training Center, I received recognition that felt more meaningful than any industry award. The National Small Business Administration selected our franchise development program as a model for community-focused business education, and I was invited to testify before a congressional subcommittee about strategies for supporting independent businesses and competing with large corporate chains. The testimony required me to articulate not just the practical benefits of community-focused business strategies, but also their broader economic and social value. I talked about the importance of local ownership in creating economic resilience, the role of independent businesses in maintaining community character, and the potential for franchise systems to support, rather than replace locally owned operations. Independent businesses don't just provide goods and services, I told the subcommittee. They create economic opportunities for local residents, support community organizations through sponsorship and volunteerism, and maintain the social connections that make neighborhoods feel like home, rather than just places where people happen to live. The questions from committee members revealed genuine interest in understanding how policy decisions could better support small business development without compromising consumer choice or economic efficiency. I found myself discussing tax policy, zoning regulations, and educational funding in ways that connected to my practical experience as a business owner. The congressional testimony led to additional speaking opportunities and consulting requests, but I remained selective about which invitations to accept. My criteria continued to focus on whether the work would contribute to better business practices, stronger communities, or more meaningful employment opportunities. One invitation I couldn't refuse came from my former business school at San Diego State. The entrepreneurship program wanted me to deliver the commencement address for graduating seniors, many of whom were facing similar decisions about pursuing conventional career paths versus starting their own businesses. Standing at the podium in the university auditorium where I'd attended classes 8 years earlier, I looked out at an audience that included my entire family in the front row. My parents had driven up from San Diego, Carlos had taken time off from his medical residency, and Jessica had flown in from a business trip specifically to hear the speech. The address I'd prepared focused on the importance of aligning career choices with personal values, even when those choices seemed unconventional or risky to others. I talked about the difference between security and safety, explaining that true security came from developing skills and confidence, rather than from accepting predetermined paths. The most dangerous career choice you can make, I told the graduating students, is accepting a role that requires you to compromise your fundamental values in exchange for external approval or financial security. That kind of compromise might provide short-term stability, but it creates long-term dissatisfaction and limits your potential for meaningful contribution. I shared stories about the early struggles in Phoenix, the family relationships that had been strained and ultimately strengthened by my unconventional choices, and the unexpected opportunities that had emerged from staying true to my original vision of community-focused business development. Success isn't about proving other people wrong, I emphasized. It's about proving yourself right about what's possible when you commit fully to work that aligns with your values and serves purposes larger than just personal advancement. During the question and answer session, a graduating senior asked about handling family pressure to pursue conventional career paths. The question was clearly personal, and I could see in her face the same uncertainty and determination I'd experienced 8 years earlier. Family pressure usually comes from love and concern, I replied. But love that requires you to abandon your authentic path isn't really supportive, even when it's well-intentioned. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to succeed in ways they couldn't have imagined, showing them that their fears were unfounded and their understanding of success was too narrow. After the ceremony, my family gathered for dinner at a restaurant near campus. The conversation was relaxed and celebratory, a stark contrast to the tense discussions that had marked our interactions 8 years earlier. Maya, that speech was powerful, Carlos said over dessert. You articulated something important about the relationship between personal authenticity and professional success. I think you helped a lot of students feel more confident about pursuing unconventional paths. It was also honest about the challenges, Jessica added. You didn't make entrepreneurship sound easy or guaranteed, but you showed that it could be deeply rewarding for people willing to do the work and accept the risks. My father was characteristically thoughtful in his response. Maya, listening to you speak today made me realize how much I've learned from watching your journey. Your approach to business leadership has influenced how I think about client relationships and community responsibility in my own practice. The comment surprised me. I'd never considered that my business philosophy might influence my father's approach to running his accounting firm. In what ways? I asked, genuinely curious. You've shown me the value of understanding clients as individuals with specific needs rather than just as revenue sources, he explained. I've started spending more time learning about my clients' personal goals and community connections, and it's improved both the quality of my service and the satisfaction I get from my work. My mother nodded in agreement. We've both become more conscious of how our business practices affect the community rather than just our bottom line. It's made our work feel more meaningful and connected to larger purposes. The conversation continued for 2 hours, covering everything from business philosophy to family relationships to long-term goals. For the first time since our reconciliation began, I felt like we were relating to each other as equals, rather than as family members trying to bridge generational and philosophical differences. Driving back to Riverside that night, I reflected on how much had changed since that confrontational day at the Fresh Mart, when Kevin had accused me of shoplifting. The incident had forced me to confront questions about identity, family relationships, and the meaning of success that I'd been avoiding for years. The journey from that moment to this one had been complex and challenging, involving professional recognition, family reconciliation, and the development of work that felt both successful and meaningful. But perhaps the most important change was internal. I no longer needed external validation to feel confident about my choices or my worth. The work continued, but it continued with deeper satisfaction and broader impact than I'd thought possible when I first started with that tiny corner store in Phoenix. I was building authentic relationships, creating opportunities for others to succeed, and contributing to communities in ways that felt sustainable and significant. 6 months later, I received a call that would test whether I'd truly internalized the lessons about authentic success and family relationships. It was my father, and his voice carried the formal tone he used for important business conversations. Maya, I have something to discuss with you, and I want you to know that whatever you decide will be fine with me and your mother. The preamble suggested this was going to be significant. I'm thinking about retiring from the accounting firm within the next 2 years, he continued. I've been approached by a larger regional firm that wants to acquire my client base. But I've also been wondering whether you might be interested in a different kind of partnership. I pulled over to the side of the road, not sure where this conversation was heading. What kind of partnership? I asked carefully. I've been thinking about the business consulting work you're doing with franchise owners, he said. There's significant overlap between franchise financial management and the accounting services I provide to small businesses. I'm wondering if we could create some kind of collaborative practice that would serve both types of clients more effectively. The proposal was intriguing, but also complicated. Working with my father professionally would require navigating family dynamics in addition to business considerations, and I wasn't sure either of us was ready for that level of integration. Dad, that's an interesting idea, but it would be a major change for both of us, I replied. What's motivating you to consider this kind of partnership? Honestly, he paused, and I could hear him choosing his words carefully. Watching your work over the past few years has reminded me why I became an accountant in the first place. I wanted to help small businesses succeed and contribute to community economic development. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of those goals and started focusing just on processing tax returns and financial statements efficiently. His admission was both touching and surprising. I'd never thought about my father's work in terms of personal mission or community impact. Working with you might help me rediscover the purpose and satisfaction that drew me to business consulting originally, he continued. But more importantly, I think we could create something together that would be more effective than what either of us could accomplish individually. I asked for time to consider his proposal, recognizing that this decision would significantly affect both our business operations and our family relationships. The opportunity was appealing, but I wanted to ensure that any partnership would be based on mutual professional respect rather than just family sentiment. Over the following weeks, I had extensive conversations with Amanda, my regional managers, and my family about the potential benefits and challenges of working professionally with my father. The consensus was that such a partnership could be valuable if structured properly, but would require clear boundaries and realistic expectations. I ultimately decided to propose a limited pilot collaboration rather than a full merger. We would work together on specific projects that served both franchise owners and small business clients, test our professional compatibility, and evaluate whether a deeper partnership made sense for our long-term goals. The pilot collaboration exceeded both our expectations. My father's expertise in financial management and regulatory compliance complemented my operational and community engagement experience perfectly. We developed comprehensive business development services that helped entrepreneurs navigate both the practical and strategic challenges of starting and growing community-focused businesses. 1 year later, we formalized the partnership through Rodriguez Business Development Associates, a consulting firm that served franchise owners, independent retailers, and small business entrepreneurs across Southern California. The company reflected both our individual expertise and our shared commitment to supporting businesses that contributed positively to their communities. Working professionally with my father required adjustments and ongoing communication about roles, responsibilities, and decision-making processes. But it also created opportunities for collaboration and mutual learning that strengthened both our business operations and our personal relationship. The partnership felt like the completion of a journey that had begun with conflict and misunderstanding, but had evolved into mutual respect and shared purpose. We were building something together that neither of us could have created alone, using our different perspectives and experiences to serve clients more effectively than either of us had managed independently. 5 years after Kevin Thompson had accused me of shoplifting in my own store, I was running a successful consulting firm with my father, managing 15 profitable retail locations, and operating training centers that had influenced franchise development practices across the country. But perhaps more importantly, I had authentic relationships with my family, meaningful work that aligned with my values, and confidence that came from staying true to my own judgment even when others questioned my choices. The journey from family disappointment to respected business leader hadn't been linear or simple, but it had been authentic. Every challenge had contributed to developing resilience. Every setback had deepened my understanding of what mattered most, and every success had created opportunities to contribute more effectively to the communities I served. Standing in my office late one evening, looking out at the lights of Riverside and thinking about the next day's meetings with franchise owners, management trainees, and consulting clients, I felt profound gratitude for the path that had brought me to this moment. The work was demanding and the responsibilities significant, but every day offered opportunities to build authentic relationships, create meaningful opportunities for others, and contribute to communities in ways that felt both successful and sustainable. The story that had begun with rejection and misunderstanding had evolved into something richer and more complex than I could have imagined when I first drove away from San Diego, with nothing but determination and a belief that meaningful work was worth pursuing regardless of others' opinions. That belief had proven correct, but in ways that were more challenging, rewarding, and ultimately fulfilling than the young woman with dreams of running a simple corner store could possibly have anticipated. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.